She inherited a rusted storage unit from an uncle she'd never met. Its corrugated metal walls were covered in decay and neglect. And everyone told her it was worthless, a cruel joke from a dead man she'd never known. But when the black maid opened that forgotten unit with her 2-year-old son Jaden by her side, she discovered something that would turn their minimum wage existence into a $260 million mystery, one that powerful people had killed to keep hidden and would kill again to reclaim. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're watching from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Now, let's continue. The call came on a Wednesday morning while Cynthia was on her hands and knees scrubbing the imported Italian marble floors of the Whitmore estate. Her fingers were raw from the industrial cleaning solution, her knees ached despite the thin foam pad she knelt on, and her mind was calculating whether she had enough in her account to buy Jaden new shoes before his current pair completely fell apart. The soles were already separating, held together with duct tape she'd carefully color-matched with a black marker so the other children at daycare wouldn't notice. She'd been working as a live-in maid for the Whitmore family for 18 months now, ever since Jaden turned 1, and she desperately needed a job that included housing. The pay was barely minimum wage, but the tiny room in the servants' quarters meant she didn't have to worry about rent. It meant Jaden had a roof over his head, and she could save the $40 a month that would have gone to a landlord. $40 that bought diapers or formula or the occasional new outfit from the thrift store. Her hands were cracked and bleeding in places from the constant exposure to bleach and ammonia. Her black and white uniform had been washed so many times the black had faded to gray, and the white had yellowed. Her dreams of finishing her nursing degree, of having a real career, of giving Jaden a better life, felt like fantasies from another lifetime. The morning had started like every other morning. She'd woken at 5, checked on Jaden sleeping peacefully in his portable crib wedged into the corner of their cramped room, and began her daily checklist. The Whitmore estate was 12,000 square feet of luxury, and every inch of it needed to be perfect before the family woke at 7. At 6:30, Mrs. Brakey, Caroline Whitmore, had swept through the main hallway with 2 of her society friends, their designer heels clicking on the marble Cynthia had just finished scrubbing. They'd been discussing their upcoming charity gala, completely ignoring Cynthia's presence, except when Caroline had gestured vaguely in her direction. "This is what I mean about finding good help these days," Caroline had said, her voice carrying that particular tone wealthy women used when discussing servants within earshot. "You really have to lower your standards and just hope for the best. But what can you do? Americans don't want these jobs anymore." Cynthia had kept her head down, her jaw tight, swallowing the pride that threatened to choke her. She wanted to say that she was American, that she worked harder than Caroline ever had in her pampered life, that this job was crushing her spirit one day at a time. But she said nothing. She couldn't afford to say anything, not with Jaden depending on her. The women had drifted away, their laughter echoing through the mansion, and Cynthia had continued scrubbing, her knees screaming, her hands burning. When Caroline's sharp voice had called down from the second-floor landing that there was a phone call, Cynthia's stomach had dropped. Phone calls during work hours were never good news. "Make it quick," Caroline had added. "You still have the guest bathrooms to finish before my luncheon at noon." Cynthia had struggled to her feet, her left knee popping painfully. She was only 26 but felt decades older. She'd picked up the cordless phone Caroline had left on the hallway table, deliberately placed too far away for comfortable reach. "Hello?" Her voice had been cautious, bracing for bad news. "Miss Cynthia Brooks?" The voice on the other end was professional, crisp, belonging to someone who wore expensive suits and worked in offices with windows. "Yes, this is she. My name is David Patterson from Patterson & Associates. I'm calling regarding the estate of Captain Samuel Brooks. I understand he was your uncle?" Cynthia had frowned, confused. "I think you might have the wrong person. I don't know any Samuel Brooks." There had been a pause, papers rustling. "You're the daughter of Marie Brooks, deceased?" "Yes, but my mother never mentioned a brother named Samuel." The lawyer's voice had softened. Captain Brooks was your mother's older brother. He served in the United Nations peacekeeping forces. He passed away 4 weeks ago. He left specific instructions regarding his estate, naming you as his sole beneficiary. Cynthia had leaned against the wall, aware of Carolyn watching from above with obvious irritation. I'm sorry he passed, but I didn't know him. Why would he leave me anything? His estate consists of one asset, Storage Unit 47 at Riverside Self-Storage Facility. The unit and its contents are now yours. A storage unit. Not money. Not help with bills. Just a storage unit probably filled with an old man's junk. The lawyer had explained that the unit had been sealed for 3 years, that her uncle had prepaid the rent with 18 months remaining, that legal documents and a key would arrive by courier. Then he'd offered condolences and hung up, leaving Cynthia standing in the hallway holding a dead phone, her mind spinning. An uncle she'd never known, a storage unit she'd never asked for, another complication in a life already drowning in them. That evening, after finishing her endless list of tasks, Cynthia had finally collapsed in her tiny room. Jaden was already asleep, picked up from daycare by the Whitmore's driver as part of her employment arrangement. His little face was peaceful, thumb in his mouth, his worn stuffed elephant clutched tight. He was her entire world, the reason she endured everything. She'd pulled out her old laptop and found the email from Patterson and Associates. Legal documents. A map to Riverside Self-Storage. The key would arrive tomorrow. Curiosity had driven her to search online. Samuel Brooks, United Nations, Rwanda. She'd found a brief mention in an article about peacekeeping operations during the 1994 genocide. Her uncle had been there during one of history's darkest chapters. She'd searched her memory for any mention of him, but came up empty. Her mother had been intensely private about her past, about the family she'd left behind in Philadelphia. Marie Brooks had worked herself to death raising Cynthia alone, moving from one struggling job to another, never quite getting ahead. She'd died of cancer 6 months before Jaden was born, never knowing she had a grandson. Why hadn't Marie mentioned a brother? What had driven them apart? The key had arrived Friday afternoon. Heavy brass, old-fashioned, with a tag marked 47. Cynthia had held it in her palm, feeling its weight, wondering what it would unlock. She'd requested her Saturday off, one of only 2 days per month she was allowed. Caroline had granted it with visible annoyance, reminding her she'd need to make up the work on Sunday. Saturday morning, Cynthia had dressed Jaden in his best outfit. The bright blue t-shirt she'd found at a thrift store and navy shorts with only one small stain she'd hidden with a patch. She'd pulled her hair back neatly and checked their reflection. They looked presentable, if poor. She hadn't had time to change out of her black and white maid's uniform. She'd been walking toward the garage where her aging Toyota was parked when Richard Whitmore had pulled up in his luxury sedan, the engine purring softly. "Cynthia," he'd called through the open window. "Heading out on your day off?" Richard Whitmore was in his late 40s, handsome in the way money maintained. Perfect teeth, expensive haircut, skin that had never known hardship. He'd always been more polite than his wife. But something in his calculating eyes made Cynthia uncomfortable. "Yes, sir. Just running an errand." "Where to?" "Maybe I can give you a ride, save you some gas money." Cynthia had hesitated. She didn't want to spend time with her employer, but gas was expensive and money was desperately tight. "That's kind of you, but I don't want to take you out of your way. I'm going to Riverside Self-Storage." Something had flickered across Richard's face. Surprise, quickly masked. "Riverside? That's exactly where I'm headed. I have some items stored there myself. Come on, hop in." There'd been no polite way to refuse. Cynthia had buckled Jaden into the back seat, the leather interior so different from her car's stained cloth seats. As Richard drove, he'd made casual conversation. "What brings you to Riverside?" "I inherited a storage unit from an uncle I never met." "An inheritance? Interesting." He'd glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "What was his name?" "Samuel Brooks. He was military, I think. UN peacekeeping." Richard's hands had tightened almost imperceptibly on the steering wheel. Samuel Brooks. That name sounds familiar. He'd pulled out his phone at the next red light, typing something quickly. Then he'd made a call, speaking quietly. "It's me. Change of plans. Meet me at Riverside in 20 minutes. Yes, today. It's important. Cynthia had stared out the window, unease growing in her chest. When they'd pulled into Riverside Self-Storage, Richard had immediately spotted several expensive cars already parked near the entrance. His business partner Edward and Edward's wife Victoria stood waiting, along with a man in an expensive suit carrying a briefcase. Richard had turned to look at her, and Cynthia had seen something in his expression that made her blood run cold. He'd pulled the paperwork from her lap where she'd set it, glancing at it before she could stop him. His eyes had locked on the unit number, 47. For just a moment, his carefully maintained mask had slipped, and Cynthia had seen something underneath. Recognition, calculation, and something that looked almost like hunger. "Well," he'd said softly, handing the papers back, "this is going to be very interesting." He'd gotten out of the car and walked toward his waiting associates, already pulling out his phone again, typing furiously. Cynthia sat frozen in the passenger seat, Jaden beside her, watching Richard gesture animatedly to his friends. They all turned to look at her, their expressions sharp with interest. Something was very wrong here. This wasn't a coincidence. And whatever was in Storage Unit 47, Richard Whitmore knew something about it. Something he hadn't wanted her to know. Cynthia climbed out of Richard's luxury sedan, lifting Jaden onto the cracked asphalt of the Riverside Self-Storage parking lot. The facility sprawled before them like a small industrial city, a maze of corrugated metal buildings stretching across several acres. Some sections gleamed in the morning sun, clearly well-maintained with fresh paint and modern security systems. Others showed the wear of decades, their metal walls streaked with rust, their foundations crumbling. Richard strode ahead confidently, and Cynthia had no choice but to follow, Jaden's small hand gripped tightly in hers. The three people waiting by the entrance turned as they approached, their expressions shifting from boredom to curiosity. "Edward, Victoria, James," Richard called out. "Thanks for coming on short notice. I have something interesting to show you." He gestured back at Cynthia. "This is Cynthia. She works at the estate as our maid. And this is her son, Jaden." The way he introduced her, emphasizing her position as maid, made Cynthia's cheeks burn. Edward Sinclair was shorter than Richard, stockier, with the aggressive posture of someone who bulldozed through life. His wife Victoria was tall and angular, dressed in cream-colored designer leisurewear that probably cost more than Cynthia earned in 6 months. The third person, James Pemberton, had the polished look of an expensive attorney, his casual clothes somehow still managing to look formal. "Charming," Victoria said, her tone making clear she meant the opposite. Her gaze swept over Cynthia's faded maid uniform with barely concealed disdain. "What brings someone like you to a storage facility?" "She inherited a unit," Richard explained before Cynthia could answer. "From an uncle she never met, the late Captain Samuel Brooks." Edward's eyebrows rose. "Samuel Brooks? Why does that name sound familiar?" "I was wondering the same thing," Richard said, his voice carrying an edge Cynthia couldn't quite interpret. "I think we should all see what the good captain left behind. Don't you?" They walked toward the small office building, a sun-bleached structure that looked as tired as everything else. Inside, an older white man sat behind a cluttered desk, a coffee mug in one hand and a racing form in the other. His name tag read, Dale, Facility Manager. He looked up with the expression of someone who'd dealt with difficult customers for too many years. "Help you folks?" Richard stepped forward first, all charm and confidence. "Richard Whitmore. I'm here to inspect my units in Building A. These are my associates." Dale checked his computer, nodded, and printed visitor passes. Then his attention shifted to Cynthia, his expression cooling noticeably when he took in her maid's uniform and her young son clinging to her skirt. "And you?" "Cynthia Brooks. I inherited Unit 47 from my uncle, Samuel Brooks. I have the key." She held up the brass key the lawyer had sent. Dale's weathered face shifted, showing something that might have been surprise. He typed slowly, checked his screen, then looked at her more carefully. "Unit 47. That was Captain Brooks's unit. You're his family?" "His niece. I never met him." Dale nodded slowly. "He was a good man. Quiet. Always polite. He had her sign several forms on a clipboard. Unit 47 is in Building D. That's our oldest section, back corner of the property. Building D? Victoria laughed, a sharp sound that echoed in the small office. Isn't that the section you keep meaning to tear down, Dale? The one with the structural issues? Dale's jaw tightened. Building D is perfectly sound. It's just older than the others. Which building are our units in? Edward asked Richard. Building A, climate-controlled premium security. Top of the line. Richard turned to Cynthia with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. We were actually about to head over there, but you know what? I'm curious about this inheritance of yours. Mind if we tag along? Building D is on the way. Cynthia was very much minded, but she couldn't say that to her employer. Of course. They left the office together, the wealthy group walking ahead while Cynthia and Jaden trailed behind. The facility was even larger than it had appeared from the parking lot, the buildings organized in a grid pattern with paved paths between them. Building A stood near the entrance, pristine and modern, with wide, clean pathways and bright new doors. Building B showed some age but was clearly maintained. Building C had visible wear but remained functional. Building D was different. The paved path deteriorated as they walked, cracks spreading like spider webs, weeds pushing through every gap. The corrugated metal walls of the buildings showed extensive rust damage, orange and brown stains streaking down from the roof lines. Several unit doors hung crooked on their tracks. The whole area had an air of abandonment, of being forgotten by time and management alike. "Oh my God," Victoria said, her voice dripping with mock sympathy. "This is where your unit is? In this section?" "The slums of storage facilities," Edward added with a laugh. "How appropriate." They turned down a narrow lane between two buildings, the rust stains worse here, and stopped at a unit near the end. The number 47 hung crooked on the door, one of its screws missing. The corrugated metal was covered in rust, dented in multiple places. The white paint faded and peeling. The concrete pad in front was shattered, thick weeds growing through every crack. It looked like something that should have been demolished years ago. "Oh no," Victoria gasped dramatically, one hand pressed to her chest in exaggerated shock. "Oh, sweetie, this is what you inherited? This is tragic." Edward pulled out his phone and snapped a photo, laughing. "I have to send this to Caroline. She's always complaining about the staff quarters being too small. This will give her some perspective on what real poverty looks like." "I'd walk away if I were you," James said, shaking his head with the authority of someone used to giving advice. "Whatever's in there, it's probably not worth the disposal fees. You'll have to pay to haul junk away. Cut your losses and forget about it." Richard circled the unit slowly, examining it from different angles. He knocked on the metal door, testing its solidity, peered at the rusted hinges. "It's certainly seen better days. What do you think is in there? Old clothes, broken furniture?" 50 years of hoarded newspapers, Edward suggested. "That's what these old guys do. Keep everything, throw away nothing." "Moth-eaten military uniforms," Victoria added. "Maybe some worthless medals nobody wants." "Boxes of expired food," James said. "I handled an estate once where the deceased had stored canned goods from the 1970s. The disposal cost more than anything in the unit was worth." They were laughing now, a cruel chorus of mockery, and Cynthia stood frozen in the center of it. Her face burned with humiliation. Her throat tightened with the effort of holding back tears. This moment, which should have been private and personal, had become entertainment for people who saw her poverty as amusing. Jaden sensed her distress the way young children always do. He pressed against her leg, his small body trembling, and started to cry. "Mama?" The sound of her son crying cut through Cynthia's paralysis. She bent down to his level, her head bowed so the tears threatening to spill wouldn't be visible to the mockers behind her. "Shh, baby. It's okay." "Why are they laughing, Mama?" Jaden's voice was small, confused, hurt. "Some people laugh when they don't understand things," Cynthia whispered, pulling him close. "It's okay. We're okay." "Don't cry, Mama," Jaden said, reaching up to touch her face with his small hand. "I'm not crying. Sweetie? She forced steadiness into her voice. Everything's fine. Behind her, the laughter continued. Victoria was showing Edward something on her phone, probably comparing this rusted unit to something else equally pathetic. James was explaining to Richard the legal complications of inheriting abandoned property. Dale had followed them from the office, a can of lubricating oil in his weathered hand. He approached Cynthia, his expression uncomfortable. I'm sorry about this. Your uncle, he deserved better than people mocking what he left behind. It's fine, Cynthia said, straightening up but keeping Jaden close. It's not fine, but I understand. Dale cleared his throat, speaking louder now so the others could hear. Miss Brooks, before you open the unit, you should know something. Your uncle received multiple offers over the years from people wanting to buy the contents. Sight unseen. He turned them all down. The laughter stopped abruptly. Richard turned sharply. What kind of offers? Dale looked uncomfortable. That's private information, Mr. Whitmore. Ballpark figure. Just give me a range. Richard's voice had lost all its casual friendliness, becoming sharp and demanding. Dale hesitated, then sighed. The most recent offer was about 6 months ago. $50,000 for the contents. No questions asked. No inspection required. The silence that followed was absolute. $50,000. For what was behind this rusted, dented, forgotten door? Victoria's mouth hung open. Edward had stopped smiling entirely. James looked suddenly alert. His lawyer instincts activated. Richard's expression was carefully neutral, but his eyes were calculating, sharp, fixed on the unit with predatory intensity. 50,000? Edward repeated. For junk in a rusted storage unit? For whatever Captain Brooks was storing, Dale corrected. And he said no every time. Said what was inside wasn't for sale at any price. Who made the offers? Richard asked. I can't disclose that. Privacy policy. Were they local? International? Give me something. Dale shook his head firmly. I've said all I can say. Richard pulled out his phone, typing rapidly. The amusement had completely vanished from his face, replaced by something harder, more focused. Victoria and Edward exchanged meaningful glances. James had pulled out a small notebook and was writing something down. The dynamic had shifted entirely. They weren't looking at Cynthia's poverty anymore. They were looking at Unit 47 like it had suddenly become interesting, valuable, worth their attention. Well, Victoria said, her tone changed now, speculative rather than mocking. Maybe it's not complete junk. Perhaps the old man had military collectibles, rare weapons or metals that have value to collectors. Or documents, James suggested. Classified information, historical records. That sort of thing can be worth serious money to the right buyers. Or maybe, Edward said slowly, his eyes narrowing, he had something else entirely. Something people would pay a premium to acquire quietly. Richard stepped closer to Cynthia, his smile returning but colder now. Cynthia, before you open that door, I want to make something clear. If there's anything valuable in there, anything at all, I'm prepared to make you a very generous offer. Cash, today? No questions asked. You could walk away with enough money to change your life. The offer hung in the air, tempting and terrifying in equal measure. Dale handed Cynthia the key and the can of lubricating oil. The lock's going to be stubborn. It hasn't been opened in 3 years, not since the captain got too sick to visit regularly. 3 years, Richard repeated. And he kept paying the rent all that time. Interesting. He paid 5 years in advance, always, Dale said. Last payment was made 4 years ago. Still has 18 months remaining. A man doesn't pay years of storage fees in advance for worthless junk, James observed. Victoria had pulled out her phone and was searching for something. Samuel Brooks, UN peacekeeper, Rwanda 1994. Oh my God. He was there during the genocide. Edward, doesn't your cousin collect conflict artifacts? Didn't he say something about items from Rwanda being particularly valuable? Extremely valuable, Edward confirmed, his attention fully locked on the unit now. If the captain brought things back from that mission, we could be talking about significant money. Richard held up his hand. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. Cynthia, the offer stands. Whatever's in there, I'll pay well for it. More than you'd get anywhere else. Cynthia looked at their faces, seeing the shift from mockery to hunger. They wanted what was behind this door. They wanted it badly enough that $50,000 suddenly seemed reasonable to them. I need to see what's inside first, she said quietly. Richard's expression hardened slightly. Of course. But remember, I'm your employer. I'm someone who can help you. Don't make the mistake of thinking you have better options. The words carried a weight that felt like a threat, wrapped in a smile. We should go check our units, Edward said to Richard. Let the maid do her thing. We can discuss business later. Yes, Victoria agreed, but her eyes lingered on Unit 47. Though I'm suddenly very curious what's behind that ugly door. They started to walk away, their expensive shoes crunching on the broken concrete. Richard paused, turning back to Cynthia. Take your time. Look through everything carefully. But Cynthia, be smart about this. Some things are more complicated than they appear, and some opportunities only come once. He smiled. I'll be in Building A if you need me, when you're ready to talk. Then they were gone. Their voices fading as they discussed theories and possibilities, leaving Cynthia alone with Dale and Jaden in front of the rusted unit. The mockery had stopped, but somehow that felt more ominous than the laughter. Jaden tugged on her sleeve, his face still wet with tears. Mama, why were they mean to us? Cynthia knelt beside him, brushing his tears away with her thumb. Because some people think being mean makes them powerful, baby. But they're wrong. Being kind makes you powerful. Being brave makes you powerful. Are you brave, Mama? She looked at the rusted door, at the key in her palm, at the mystery her uncle had left her. I'm going to try to be, sweetie. For you, I'm going to try. Dale cleared his throat. For what it's worth, your uncle was a good man. Whatever he left you, he had his reasons. Don't let those people pressure you into anything. Thank you, Cynthia whispered. She stood, gripping the key tightly, staring at Unit 47. Whatever was behind that door had been important enough for someone to offer $50,000. Important enough for her uncle to refuse every offer. Important enough that Richard Whitmore had suddenly become very interested in her inheritance. She needed to see what was inside. She needed to understand what her uncle had left her. And she needed to figure out why powerful people were suddenly treating her rusty storage unit like it contained treasure. Cynthia waited until Richard's group disappeared around the corner toward Building A, their voices fading into the distance. Only then did she turn her full attention to Unit 47. The rusted door looming before her like a gateway to answers she wasn't sure she wanted. Her hands trembled as she inserted the brass key into the padlock. The mechanism was stubborn, frozen by years of exposure to the elements. She twisted, pulled, tried again. Nothing. Here, Dale said, stepping forward with the can of lubricating oil. He sprayed the lock mechanism generously, working the key back and forth gently. Give it a minute to penetrate. They stood in silence, Jaden pressed against Cynthia's leg, the three of them staring at the rusted lock like it held the secrets of the universe. Maybe it did. Try now, Dale said. Cynthia twisted the key again. This time, with a grinding protest of metal against metal, the lock turned. The shackle popped open with a click that seemed impossibly loud in the quiet morning. There you go, Dale said. He handed her a flashlight from his maintenance belt. It's going to be dark in there. Power to these old units was disconnected years ago. He paused, then added quietly, Your uncle loved you, you know. Even if you never met. A man doesn't do what he did unless family matters to him. Before Cynthia could ask what he meant by that, Dale walked away, leaving her alone with Jaden and the now unlocked unit. She gripped the handle at the bottom of the corrugated door and pulled upward. The door screeched along its damaged track, a sound like metal screaming, loud enough to make Jaden cover his ears. The door stuck halfway up, refusing to go farther, but it was enough. Enough to reveal the dark interior beyond. Cynthia clicked on the flashlight, and the beam cut through the musty darkness. Her heart sank. The unit contained exactly what the Whitmores had predicted: junk. Old military duffel bags were stacked against the left wall, their canvas faded and worn. Cardboard boxes filled most of the floor space, many of them water-stained, their corners deteriorating. A few pieces of broken furniture leaned against the right wall. A chair with a missing leg, a small table with a cracked top, a bookshelf that had collapsed in on itself. Rusted tools scattered here and there. A footlocker with a broken latch sat near the entrance, its contents visible. Old boots, more canvas bags, what looked like camping equipment. Nothing valuable, nothing worth $50,000, nothing that would explain Richard's sudden intense interest. "Is it treasure, Mama?" Jaden asked, trying to peer inside. "No, baby. Just old things." Cynthia's voice was flat with disappointment. "Stay right here where I can see you, okay? Don't go wandering." "Okay, Mama." Cynthia stepped into the unit, the concrete floor gritty beneath her shoes. The smell was overwhelming. Mildew, old canvas, dust, and something metallic. She moved carefully, testing each step, aware that the floor could be unstable. She started with the duffel bags, unzipping the first one with effort. Inside, she found her uncle's uniform, carefully folded despite the years. The blue beret of UN peacekeepers, his identification badge, the photo showing a serious-faced black man in his 40s, his eyes carrying a weight that spoke of things seen and not forgotten. Captain Samuel Brooks. Blood type O positive. Stationed Rwanda, 1993-1994. Her uncle. A real person who'd lived and worked and served. Beneath the uniform, she found letters. Dozens of them, bundled together with a rubber band that disintegrated when she touched it. The letters were addressed in careful handwriting. "To my sister Marie." Cynthia's breath caught. These were letters to her mother, letters that had never been sent. She opened one, dated 1995. "Dear Marie, I don't know if you'd want to hear from me after all these years. I left when you were just 15, joined the service, and never looked back. That was wrong. I should have stayed, should have helped you after Mama died. But I was young and stupid, and thought the world was bigger than family. I was wrong about that too. I'm sorry, little sister. I'm so sorry." Another letter, dated 2003. "Marie, I heard through old neighbors that you have a daughter now. That makes me an uncle, I guess. I wonder if she looks like you, if she has your smile. I wanted to reach out, to meet her, but I don't have the right. Not after abandoning you. I made choices, and I'm living with them. But I think about you every day." A letter from 2010. "I'm sick, Marie. The doctors say I have a few years left if I'm lucky. I keep thinking I should call you, should try to reconnect, but what would I say? Sorry I disappeared for 40 years? Some things can't be fixed with words, but I want you to know I loved you. I always loved you. And I'm proud of the woman you became, even though I had no part in it. You deserved better than me for a brother." Cynthia's tears fell onto the yellowed paper, smudging the ink. Her mother had died 5 years ago, never knowing her brother had thought of her, had wanted to reconnect, had carried guilt for decades over choices made in youth. She wiped her eyes and continued searching. In another box, she found photographs. Samuel as a young man, barely 20, in his first military uniform, pride and hope in his eyes. Samuel with other soldiers, arms around each other's shoulders, the easy camaraderie of shared purpose. Samuel in Rwanda, standing in front of a UN vehicle, his expression older now, haunted. And then a photo that made her gasp. 2 teenagers, black boy and girl, standing together at a birthday party, both smiling widely at the camera. The boy held a cake with 16 candles. The girl had her arm around his shoulders. On the back, in her mother's distinctive handwriting, Sam's 16th birthday, before everything changed. Her mother and uncle, together, happy, before whatever happened to drive them apart. Cynthia sat on the concrete floor, surrounded by the remnants of her uncle's life, and let herself grieve. For the man she'd never known. For the relationship her mother had lost. For all the years that could have been different if pride and guilt hadn't kept them apart. "Mama?" Jaden's voice pulled her back. "Mama, I see something." She looked up, wiping her face. Jaden was pointing into the unit, toward the back wall. "What is it, baby?" "Something shiny. Behind that." Cynthia stood, following his pointing finger. Against the back wall, partially hidden by a large tarp, she could see the edge of something metallic. She moved carefully through the cluttered space, pushing aside boxes and bags. The tarp came away easily, revealing a large metal cabinet. Military issue, by the look of it, olive green with reinforced corners and a heavy-duty lock. Unlike everything else in the unit, this cabinet wasn't rusted or damaged. Someone had maintained it, kept it clean and dry. Cynthia ran her hand over the surface. The metal was cool and smooth. This was important. This had been protected while everything else deteriorated. She tried the lock, but it held firm. She searched through the nearby boxes, looking for a key. Nothing. She checked the duffel bags again, the pockets of her uncle's uniform. Nothing. Then she remembered the footlocker near the entrance. The one with the broken latch. She returned to it, digging through the camping equipment and old boots. At the very bottom, taped to the inside of the lid, she found a small key attached to a piece of paper. The paper read, in her uncle's handwriting, "For Marie's daughter, if she's brave enough." Cynthia's hands shook as she peeled away the tape. He'd known. He'd planned for this. He'd left this specifically for her. She returned to the cabinet, inserted the small key, and turned it. The lock clicked open smoothly, well-oiled and maintained despite the years. She opened the cabinet doors. Inside were stacks of wrapped packages, each one carefully labeled with dates, locations, and catalog numbers written in her uncle's precise handwriting. The packages were wrapped in acid-free paper and sealed with special tape designed for long-term storage. Someone had taken extraordinary care with these items. Cynthia's heart pounded as she selected a package labeled Kigali National Museum, April 15, 1994, item 47A. She carefully unwrapped it. The object inside took her breath away. It was a mask, carved from dark wood, clearly very old. The craftsmanship was extraordinary. The face was serene but powerful, with intricate ceremonial markings carved around the edges. Inlaid stones that might have been amber formed the eyes. Even to Cynthia's untrained eye, this was something special, something valuable, something that belonged in a museum. She set it down carefully and reached for another package. This one was smaller, heavier. When she unwrapped it, she found a wooden box with bronze fittings. She opened the lid. Inside were gemstones. Dozens of them. Cut and polished, they sparkled even in the dim flashlight beam. Rubies, emeralds, sapphires, stones she couldn't identify. They were arranged carefully on velvet, each one significant. "Mama, pretty," Jaden said from the doorway, his eyes wide. "Yes, baby, very pretty. Stay there. Okay?" She opened more packages, each one revealing treasures that seemed impossible. Ancient manuscripts, their pages covered in languages she couldn't read, but could recognize as significant. Golden artifacts with hallmarks and inscriptions, ceremonial objects that clearly had deep cultural meaning, jewelry that looked like it belonged to royalty. At the bottom of the cabinet, beneath all the wrapped packages, lay a leather-bound journal. The cover was worn but intact, the leather soft with age and handling. Cynthia opened it carefully. The first page, in her uncle's handwriting. April 12, 1994. I cannot let them destroy these. Cannot let them steal what belongs to a people already being destroyed. The world must know what was stolen, what was lost. I will protect these until I can return them to their rightful people. God forgive me if I'm wrong. God help me if I'm right. Cynthia turned the pages, reading entries that told a story of theft and courage and impossible choices. April 15th, 1994. Found the shipment. 3 trucks loaded with crates from the National Museum, from churches, from historical sites. They were taking everything, destroying their history while destroying their people. I couldn't let it happen. I intercepted the trucks, people died. I think I killed someone. I'm not sure. Everything happened so fast. April 20th, 1994. I've hidden the crates. 6 months of pay to bribe the warehouse owner. He thinks it's stolen medical supplies. Better he doesn't know the truth. The mercenaries are looking for their shipment. The buyers are asking questions. I need to be careful. May 3rd, 1994. I know who commissioned the theft now. Names, addresses, payment records. Wealthy collectors from America and Europe, buying stolen heritage while people die. They paid $3.2 million for these artifacts. $3.2 million for history that belongs to Rwanda. The names make me sick. The names are R. Whitmore, New York, V. Ashford, London, H. Dubois, Paris. Cynthia's vision blurred. She read the name again. R. Whitmore. Richard Whitmore. Her employer. The man who'd given her a ride this morning. The man who'd mocked her at this very unit. He'd paid millions to steal cultural artifacts during a genocide. She continued reading, her hands trembling. June 10th, 1994. I can't go to the authorities. The buyers have connections. Police, military, UN officials. I've been transferred suddenly to a different post. Someone's trying to separate me from the artifacts. I'm requesting early leave. I need to get the crates out of Rwanda before someone finds them. August 2nd, 1994. Made it to the States. The artifacts are in storage. I thought I'd feel relief, but I just feel tired and guilty. People died protecting these items. An entire culture was nearly destroyed. And I'm hiding their treasures in a storage unit in America. What kind of hero does that? The entries continued, years passing. Her uncle's attempts to find a legal way to return the artifacts. His growing paranoia, as he realized the buyers were still searching. March 15th, 2003. Tried to contact the Rwandan embassy today. Was told to send a letter through official channels. Did that 6 months ago. No response. I think the letters are being intercepted. The Whitmores have connections everywhere. I saw one of their people following me yesterday. I need to be more careful. July 23rd, 2010. The doctor says I have cancer, maybe 5 years. I need to make a plan. The artifacts can't die with me. They need to go home. But who can I trust? Marie died last year. I should have called her, should have reconnected. Now it's too late. But she had a daughter. My niece. Cynthia. Maybe she's the answer. Maybe a woman the Whitmores know nothing about. A woman with no connection to me can succeed where I failed. The final entry was dated 3 weeks before his death. I'm leaving everything to Cynthia. She works for the Whitmore family, though she doesn't know what I know about them. She's strong. Dale tells me she's raising a son alone, working as a maid, surviving against the odds. She has courage. I pray she has enough. The journal contains everything. Names, payments, documentation. Enough to prove the theft. Enough to return the artifacts. Enough to bring justice. Forgive me, Cynthia, for this burden. But some things matter more than safety. Some things matter more than one life. Give them back. Return them home. And maybe, in some small way, you can finish what I started. Maybe you can be the hero I couldn't be. Cynthia closed the journal, her mind reeling. She looked at the wrapped packages, at the treasures her uncle had protected for 30 years. She understood now. Understood the $50,000 offers. Understood Richard's interest. Understood everything. These artifacts had been stolen during the Rwandan genocide. Her uncle had intercepted them, hidden them, spent his life protecting them. And Richard Whitmore had been one of the buyers. Richard knew, or at least suspected, that these artifacts were here. That's why he'd offered her a ride. That's why he'd followed her to this unit. If he found out what she'd discovered, if he learned she had proof of his crime, proof that could destroy his reputation and his freedom, what would he do? She thought of his smile this morning, his casual cruelty, the way his friends had laughed at her poverty. She thought of the journal entry. People died. I think I killed someone. Men who paid millions for stolen cultural property during a genocide wouldn't hesitate to eliminate a maid who stood between them and exposure. Cynthia looked out at Jaden, sitting patiently on the concrete pad, playing with a stick he'd found. Her beautiful son. Her reason for everything. She couldn't let Richard know what she'd found. Not yet. Not until she figured out what to do. She quickly began rewrapping the artifacts, her hands moving fast, her mind racing. She took the journal and two of the smaller packages, the mask and the box of gems, and buried them deep in her bag. Everything else she left in the cabinet, closing and locking it. She arranged boxes in front of the cabinet, making it look like she hadn't found anything important. Just an old cabinet full of more junk, nothing worth a second look. She emerged from the unit, pulling the door back down. It screeched closed, rust flaking away. "Did you find treasure?" Jaden asked hopefully. "Just some old papers, baby. Family things, nothing exciting." But her heart was pounding. Her hands were shaking. Because she had found treasure. Not gold, not jewels, but something far more valuable and far more dangerous. She'd found the truth, and the truth was going to change everything. Cynthia found Dale near the office, his weathered face concerned as she approached with Jaden. She'd pulled the unit door closed, secured the padlock, and tucked the key deep into her pocket, where it pressed against her thigh like a burning coal. "Find what you were looking for?" Dale asked. "Just old military things, family papers, nothing valuable." The lie tasted bitter, but necessary. "I need some time to go through everything properly, decide what to keep." Dale nodded slowly, but his eyes held a knowing quality that made Cynthia wonder how much he'd guessed. "Take all the time you need. Like I said, rent's paid for another 18 months. Did Mr. Whitmore leave?" "Left about 10 minutes ago. Him and his friends." Dale paused, then added quietly, "But he came back to the office before he drove off. Asked me questions about your unit, how long it had been sealed, whether your uncle ever mentioned what was inside, whether anyone else had keys." Cynthia's blood ran cold. "What did you tell him?" "Told him it was none of his business. Privacy policy." Dale met her eyes. "But, Miss Brooks, that man's interest in your inheritance isn't casual. Be careful. Your uncle spent 30 years being careful. There was a reason for that." "Thank you," Cynthia whispered. She walked to her car, Jaden's hand in hers, hyper-aware of her surroundings. Was someone watching? Had Richard left someone behind to observe her? The large garbage bag she carried held the journal, the ceremonial mask, and the box of gemstones, wrapped in her jacket to avoid suspicion. To anyone watching, she was just taking home some family papers and old clothes. The drive back to the Whitmore estate felt endless. Every car behind her seemed suspicious. Every glance from other drivers felt loaded with meaning. She was being paranoid, she told herself. But then again, her uncle's journal had documented 30 years of very real danger. Maybe paranoia was just survival. She parked in the garage and entered through the servants' entrance, hoping to avoid the family. No such luck. Caroline was in the hallway, dressed for an afternoon garden party. Her friends already gathered on the back terrace. "You're back early," Caroline said, her tone making it clear this was an accusation, not an observation. "I thought you'd be gone all day." The inheritance was just some old papers. Nothing that required much time. Caroline's eyes swept over the garbage bag. "What's that?" "Family documents, letters. I wanted to read through them." "How sentimental." The words dripped with disdain. "Well, since you're back, I need you to serve refreshments to my guests. We're on the terrace, and change out of that uniform first. You look like you've been rolling in dust." "Yes, ma'am." Cynthia hurried to her tiny room, Jaden trailing behind. She locked the door, her hands shaking now that she was alone. She needed to hide the artifacts somewhere safe. Somewhere the Whitmores would never think to look. The crawl space. She'd discovered it 3 months ago when a pipe had leaked in her bathroom. The access panel was hidden behind her small dresser, easy to overlook. The space beyond was cramped but dry, stretching beneath the servants' quarters. She moved the dresser, pried open the access panel, and carefully placed the garbage bag deep into the crawl space. She covered it with an old blanket, then replaced the panel and pushed the dresser back into position. "Mama, what are you doing?" Jaden asked, his eyes wide with curiosity. "Just storing some things, baby. Secret things that need to stay safe." "Like treasure?" "Exactly like treasure." She changed into a clean uniform, washed the dust from her face and hands, and went to serve Caroline's guests. The afternoon passed in a blur of pouring tea, arranging pastries, and being invisible while wealthy women gossiped about people Cynthia would never meet. Finally, evening came. She fed Jaden dinner, gave him a bath, and tucked him into his crib. He fell asleep quickly, exhausted from the day's adventure. Cynthia waited another hour, listening to the sounds of the estate settling into nighttime quiet, before she retrieved her old laptop from beneath her bed. The laptop was 6 years old, held together with tape, its battery dying. But it connected to the estate's Wi-Fi, and tonight, that was all she needed. She started with the basics, searching Rwandan Genocide 1994. The results were overwhelming and horrifying. Between April and July of 1994, approximately 800,000 people had been killed in 100 days. The Tutsi population had been systematically targeted by Hutu extremists in one of history's fastest and most efficient genocides. Cynthia read about the international community's failure to intervene, about UN peacekeepers ordered to withdraw, about the chaos and horror that had consumed the country. Her uncle had been there, had witnessed this, had tried to protect refugees while everything fell apart around him. She searched for stolen artifacts Rwanda genocide. The results were extensive. Thousands of cultural items had been looted during the chaos, museums ransacked, churches stripped of sacred objects, historical sites destroyed. Much of Rwanda's cultural heritage had simply vanished, stolen by opportunistic thieves or deliberately destroyed by those who wanted to erase Tutsi history entirely. Then she found the articles by Amina Uwimana. Amina was a journalist who'd survived the genocide as a child. She'd spent the past 30 years documenting stolen cultural property, tracking items through the black market, working with international organizations to recover Rwanda's heritage. Her articles were detailed, passionate, and heartbreaking. One article, published 2 years ago, was titled, "The Lost Treasures of Rwanda, 30 Years of Theft and Hope." It listed specific items that had disappeared during the genocide, items that had never been recovered despite extensive searches. Cynthia's heart raced as she read the descriptions. The Mask of Queen Kanjogera, a ceremonial mask carved in the 18th century, used in royal coronations, made of rare blackwood with amber inlays. This mask represents the connection between the Rwandan monarchy and the spiritual world. It was stolen from the National Museum in Kigali on April 15, 1994. Estimated value? Priceless. Cultural significance? Immeasurable. She carefully retrieved the garbage bag from the crawl space, unwrapped the mask she'd taken, and compared it to the photograph in the article. It was an exact match. The article continued with other items. The crown jewels of the Rwandan monarchy, a collection of golden artifacts, ceremonial weapons, and precious stones dating back centuries. These items were used in royal ceremonies and represented the continuity of Rwandan kingship. Stolen from multiple locations between April 12 and April 20, 1994. Current whereabouts? Unknown. Cynthia thought of the other packages in the cabinet at the storage unit. The golden artifacts, the gemstones, the manuscripts. She was holding pieces of Rwanda's soul, items that had survived centuries of history only to be stolen during the country's darkest hour. She searched for values, finding articles about recovered stolen art. A single African mask from the colonial period had recently sold for $12 million. A collection of royal artifacts from Benin had been valued at over $200 million. Conservative estimates put her uncle's collection at similar values, possibly higher given the historical significance and the circumstances of the theft. Over $200 million worth of cultural property hidden in a rusted storage unit. But the money wasn't what mattered, Cynthia realized as she read more of Amina's articles. These items weren't just valuable. They were pieces of identity stolen from a people who'd already lost everything. They were history that needed to come home. She pulled out her uncle's journal again, reading more carefully now that she understood the context. April 15, 1994. We were escorting refugees to the border when we saw the trucks. 3 of them, loaded with crates. The mercenaries weren't even hiding what they were doing. They knew the world wasn't watching, that no one would stop them. I couldn't let them take everything. There was a firefight. 2 mercenaries died. Maybe 3. I don't remember clearly. The refugees helped me hide the crates in an abandoned warehouse. They understood what these items meant. They were losing everything else. At least their history could survive. May 10, 1994. The buyers are looking for their shipment. I intercepted communications. They paid $3.2 million up front. Now they want their goods. The names on the transaction: R. Whitmore, New York. V. Ashford, London. H. Dubois, Paris. Collectors who saw genocide as a shopping opportunity. I've documented everything. Payment records, shipping manifests, communications. If I die, at least there will be proof. August 1995. Someone followed me today. Might be paranoia. Might be real. Can't take chances. I'm leaving the military, going civilian. I'll disappear into normal life. They can't track me if I'm invisible. June 2003. Tried to contact Rwandan embassy again. No response. I think the buyers have people watching for any attempts to return the items. The Whitmores have connections everywhere. Political donations, charity boards. They're untouchable through normal channels. March 2015. Saw one of Whitmore's security people outside my apartment today, I'm sure of it. After 20 years, they're still searching. I need to move the storage unit to a facility they won't connect to me. Need to be more careful. The final entries detailed his declining health, his growing urgency to find someone who could complete his mission, his discovery that his sister had died, his research into her daughter. February 2024. Marie's daughter, Cynthia, works as a live-in maid for the Whitmore family. The irony is almost poetic. She's raising a son alone, working herself to exhaustion. She's strong. Has to be. To survive what she's surviving. She has no connection to me, no link the Whitmores would know about. If I leave everything to her, maybe she can succeed where I failed. Maybe justice can come through her hands. Cynthia sat back, her mind reeling. Her uncle had known exactly where she was, who she worked for, what her life was like. He'd chosen her specifically because she was invisible to the Whitmores, just another servant they didn't see as fully human. He'd given her the tools for justice, the artifacts, the documentation, the proof of the crime. But he'd also given her an impossible burden. How could she, a single mother working as a maid, take on one of the wealthiest families in the city? A sound outside her door made her freeze. Footsteps in the hallway. Slow, deliberate. They stopped outside her room. Cynthia quickly closed the laptop, shoved the journal under her pillow, and held her breath. A soft knock. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She approached the door slowly, checked through the peephole. Richard Whitmore stood in the hallway, dressed in expensive loungewear, his expression unreadable in the dim light. She had no choice but to open the door. Refusing would be suspicious. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, keeping her voice steady. "Is something wrong?" "Cynthia." His smile was smooth, practiced, completely at odds with the calculation in his eyes. "I'm sorry to disturb you so late. I wanted to apologize for my friend's behavior today. Victoria and Edward can be insensitive. That mockery was inappropriate." "It's fine." "It's not fine." His eyes scanned past her into the small room, taking in the cramped space, the sleeping child, the poverty. "I also wanted to discuss your inheritance. I imagine it must be overwhelming, dealing with a storage unit full of your uncle's belongings. If you'd like, I could arrange to have it cleared for you. professional disposal service. As a favor. No cost to you. Cynthia's pulse raced, but she forced her expression to remain neutral. That's very kind, Mr. Whitmore. But they're my family's things. I'll handle it myself. His smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Of course. But the offer stands. Anytime you're ready. He paused, his gaze locking onto hers with uncomfortable intensity. Your uncle, Samuel Brooks. He was an interesting man. I actually met him once, years ago. Very briefly. Small world, isn't it? The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. He was telling her he knew who Samuel was. He was establishing a connection, a shared history. He was warning her. I never met him, Cynthia said carefully. So I wouldn't know. No, of course not. Richard's smile returned. But it was colder now. Well, I'll let you get some rest. Just remember, Cynthia, I'm here to help if you need anything. Anything at all. He walked away, his footsteps fading down the hallway. Cynthia closed the door, locked it, and leaned against it, her legs shaking. He knew. Maybe not everything, but he suspected. And he was watching her, waiting to see what she'd do next. She crossed to Jaden's crib, watching her son sleep peacefully, completely unaware of the danger surrounding them. She'd worked so hard to give him safety, stability, a chance at a better life. And now her uncle's legacy threatened all of that. But as she looked at her sleeping son, Cynthia realized something. Jaden deserved to grow up in a world where justice mattered, where powerful people couldn't steal and destroy without consequences. Where doing the right thing, even when it was dangerous, was still possible. Her uncle had spent 30 years protecting those artifacts. 30 years living in fear, always looking over his shoulder, sacrificing everything for a principle. He'd chosen her to finish his mission because he believed she was strong enough. She couldn't go to the police. The Whitmores had connections there. She couldn't go to the authorities. Richard's influence reached too far. But Amina Uwimana, the journalist who'd spent decades documenting stolen heritage, who'd survived genocide and dedicated her life to recovery and justice, she might help. She might know how to do this properly, legally, safely. Cynthia returned to her laptop and searched for Amina's contact information. She found an email address associated with her articles at the International Tribune. She opened a new browser, created an anonymous email account, and began drafting a message. Tomorrow, she would reach out. Tomorrow, she would take the first step toward completing her uncle's mission. Tonight, she would hide the artifacts, protect her son, and pray she was strong enough for what was coming. Because Richard Whitmore's visit had made one thing clear. The danger was real, immediate, and closing in. And there was no turning back now. The next morning, Cynthia moved through her duties with mechanical precision, but everything had changed. The Whitmore estate, which she'd cleaned and maintained for 18 months, now looked different to her eyes. Tainted, corrupt. The artwork lining the grand hallway, pieces she'd dusted 1,000 times without really seeing them, now made her wonder. That African sculpture in the drawing room? How had it been acquired? The ancient textiles in the formal dining room? Were they stolen too? How much of the Whitmores' carefully curated wealth had been built on theft and blood? Caroline was hosting her Saturday brunch, a weekly gathering of wealthy women who discussed charity work while servants refilled their champagne glasses. Cynthia served coffee and arranged pastries on expensive china, moving through the crowd like a ghost. They never looked at her directly, never acknowledged her presence except to snap fingers when they wanted something. The museum gala next month, one woman was saying. I'm chairing the acquisitions committee. We've secured some marvelous pieces from private collectors. How wonderful, another responded. Cultural preservation is so important. These artifacts belong in museums where everyone can appreciate them. The irony was suffocating. These women, discussing cultural preservation while surrounded by items that might have been stolen from the very cultures they claim to honor. More coffee, Caroline snapped, not looking up. Yes, ma'am. Cynthia refilled cups, cleared plates, and waited for an opportunity. Finally, when the women moved to the terrace for after-brunch cocktails, she slipped away toward Richard's study. His private office was strictly forbidden to staff, but desperate times required desperate measures. She opened the door quietly, her heart pounding, and crossed to his computer. It was password protected, but she didn't need his computer. She just needed internet access. She pulled out her phone, connected to the estate's Wi-Fi, and navigated to the International Tribune's website using the browser's incognito mode. She found Amina Uwimana's articles again, this time looking for direct contact information. At the bottom of one article was an email address for story tips and information about stolen cultural property. Cynthia had spent last night watching a documentary about whistleblowers and how they protected themselves. She knew about VPNs, anonymous email services, and the importance of not leaving digital trails. Using her phone's VPN app, she created a new anonymous email account through a secure service. She drafted the message carefully. Ms. Uwimana, I have information about Rwandan artifacts stolen during the 1994 genocide. My uncle, Captain Samuel Brooks, UN peacekeeper, intercepted a shipment of stolen items and has kept them hidden for 30 years. He recently passed and left them to me. I have his journal documenting the theft, including names of buyers and payment records. The artifacts include the mask of Queen Kanjogera and items from the Crown Jewels collection. I want to return them to Rwanda, but the original buyers are threatening me. I need help. Please respond if you can assist. She read it 3 times, making sure it contained enough detail to be credible, but not so much that it could identify her if intercepted. Then she hit send. The message disappeared into the digital void. Now, she could only wait. She deleted her browsing history, closed all apps, and slipped out of Richard's study just as she heard footsteps in the hallway. The afternoon dragged endlessly. Cynthia cleaned the guest bathrooms, changed linens, prepared the evening meal. Every task felt surreal, like she was watching herself from outside her body. She was planning to bring down these people, to expose their crimes, and yet here she was, folding their towels and cooking their dinner. At 4 o'clock, as she was finishing the kitchen cleanup, Richard appeared in the doorway. Cynthia, a moment please. In my office. Her stomach dropped. Yes, sir. She followed him down the hallway, past the stolen art, into his private domain. The office was expensively decorated with dark wood furniture, leather chairs, and artwork that probably cost more than she'd earn in a lifetime. He gestured to a chair facing his desk. Please, sit. She sat, surprised. In 18 months, she'd never been invited to sit in their presence. Servants stood. Servants waited. Servants remained invisible and ready to serve. Richard settled into his own chair, steepling his fingers, studying her with the intensity of someone evaluating merchandise. Cynthia, I've been thinking about your situation. You're a single mother, working hard to provide for your son. That can't be easy. I manage, she said carefully. I'm sure you do. But managing and thriving are different things, aren't they? He leaned forward, his expression arranged into something approximating sympathy. I'd like to make you an offer, a generous one. He slid a piece of paper across the desk. A check, already filled out in her name, for $50,000. Cynthia's breath caught. She'd never seen that much money, never imagined having it. $50,000 would change everything. She could move out, finish nursing school, give Jaden everything he needed. In exchange, Richard continued smoothly, I'd like to purchase the contents of your storage unit, sight unseen. Whatever's in there, it's yours to sell, and I'm willing to pay well above market value. Think of it as compensation for yesterday's rudeness. Cynthia stared at the check. The numbers blurred. She thought of Jaden's worn clothes, the shoes held together with tape, the tiny room they shared. She thought of freedom from this mansion, from Caroline's cruelty, from scrubbing floors until her hands bled. Then she thought of the mask, the journal, her uncle's 30 years of sacrifice. Why? She asked, looking up. Why would you pay $50,000 for old military equipment and junk? Richard's smile tightened fractionally. Sentimental reasons. Your uncle and I had dealings years ago. I owe his memory a kindness. What kind of dealings? Nothing important. Ancient history. He gestured to the check. What matters is this opportunity. $50,000, Cynthia. That's life-changing money for someone in your position. I need to think about it. The smile vanished entirely. His expression hardened, the mask of sympathy dropping away to reveal something cold and calculating beneath. Of course. But Cynthia, before you decide, there's something you should know. He opened a folder on his desk, turning it so she could see the contents. Photographs. Multiple photographs of her room. Of Caroline's jewelry box sitting on the dresser she'd never touched. Of expensive pieces laid out on her bed. Of items that had never been in her possession appearing in her space. Her blood turned to ice. We've had some thefts recently, Richard said, his voice soft and deadly. Small items from Caroline's jewelry collection. We haven't called the police yet, but we did install hidden cameras throughout the estate. And the footage is quite interesting. He was framing her. The photos were staged, the footage would be fabricated or edited. But who would believe a maid over one of the wealthiest families in the city? Of course, Richard continued. If you were to accept my offer, we'd forget all about these unfortunate suspicions. I'd provide an excellent reference for your next employment, plus a generous severance package. You'd leave with money, a clean record, and a fresh start. He paused, letting that sink in before delivering the killing blow. But if you refuse, I'm afraid we'd have no choice but to involve the authorities. Theft is a serious crime, Cynthia. And when children are present in a home where theft occurs, Child Protective Services takes a very keen interest. They'd want to ensure Jaden is in a safe, stable environment, with a parent who isn't facing criminal charges. The threat to Jaden hit her like a physical blow. They would take her son. They would fabricate evidence, press charges, and use the system to destroy her. And she'd have no defense because she was poor, powerless, invisible. Can I have time to think about it? Her voice came out steady despite the panic clawing at her throat. Until tomorrow evening, Richard agreed. But Cynthia, don't do anything foolish. Don't contact anyone about this. Don't research the contents of that unit any further. Just take the money and walk away. It's the smart choice, the only choice, really. She stood on trembling legs. I understand. Good. I'm glad we have an understanding. His smile returned, sharp and predatory. You're dismissed. She walked out of his office in a daze. The hallway seemed longer than before, the walls closing in. In the corridor, she nearly collided with Caroline, who regarded her with cold, knowing eyes. Richard is being very generous, Caroline said, her voice like ice. I'd think carefully if I were you. Jobs like this are hard to come by, especially for someone with your circumstances. A criminal record would make them impossible to find. The message was clear. Comply or be destroyed. Cynthia made it back to her room somehow, locked the door and leaned against it, fighting for breath. Jaden looked up from his toys, his innocent face worried. Mama okay? Yes, baby, Mama's okay. She pulled him into her arms, holding him tight. That evening, after Jaden fell asleep, she checked her anonymous email on her phone. There was a response from Amina Uwimana. If you truly have what you described, we need to talk immediately. This is dangerous. These people have killed before. Do not, under any circumstances, tell them you've contacted me. Tomorrow, 10 a.m., Riverside Coffee on Market Street. Come alone. Bring proof if possible. I can help, but we must be extremely careful. Delete this message after reading. Cynthia read it 3 times, then deleted it as instructed. She looked at Jaden sleeping peacefully. His small chest rising and falling. She thought about the check for $50,000 sitting on Richard's desk with her name on it. She thought about the fabricated evidence, the threats, the easy path of compliance. Then she thought about her uncle, who'd spent 30 years in hiding, always looking over his shoulder, sacrificing everything to protect artifacts that weren't even his to protect. Who'd lived in fear and died alone because he believed some things mattered more than personal safety. She thought about the mask of Queen Conjugera, stolen from a museum while people died in the streets. About cultural heritage erased during genocide. About the Rwandan people who'd lost everything and deserved to have at least their history returned. She thought about what kind of person she wanted to be or what kind of example she wanted to set for her son. The choice crystallized with sudden clarity. She would meet Amina tomorrow. She would expose the Whitmores. She would return the artifacts to Rwanda, even if it cost her everything. Because her uncle had been right. Some things were worth more than money or safety. Some things were worth fighting for, even when the fight seemed impossible. Justice was worth fighting for. Truth was worth fighting for. And the legacy she left her son was worth more than any amount of money Richard Whitmore could offer. Tomorrow, she would take the first real step toward completing her uncle's mission. Tonight, she would be brave enough to make that choice. The next morning, Cynthia approached Caroline with carefully rehearsed words. "Mrs. Whitmore, I need to take Jaden to the doctor this morning. He's been having ear infections and the clinic has an opening at 10. Caroline looked up from her breakfast with visible irritation. "Today? You know we have the garden club meeting this afternoon. I need you here." "I understand, but the clinic appointment was difficult to get. I'll be back by noon in plenty of time to prepare." Caroline waved her hand dismissively. "Fine. But don't make this a habit, and you're working through your lunch break to make up the time." "Yes, ma'am. Thank you." Back in her room, Cynthia carefully packed Jaden's diaper bag. The ceremonial mask went in first, wrapped in a clean towel. The box of gemstones fit in a side pocket. Her uncle's journal she placed at the bottom, cushioned by spare diapers. To anyone watching, she was just a mother preparing for a doctor's visit. The recording device Agent Jackson had mentioned in Amina's email instructions was supposedly waiting for her at the cafe. She'd memorized the address, Riverside Coffee on Market Street, a neighborhood 40 minutes away where wealthy socialites would never venture. She dressed Jaden in clean clothes, kissed his forehead, and carried him to her car. As she drove away from the estate, she checked the rearview mirror constantly, looking for cars that might be following. The street seemed normal, but paranoia had become her constant companion. Riverside Coffee was exactly as described. A small neighborhood cafe with mismatched furniture and local art on the walls. The kind of place where people actually lived and worked, not the sterile luxury establishments the Whitmores frequented. Cynthia arrived 15 minutes early. Ordered tea she was too nervous to drink, and sat at a corner table where she could watch the entrance. Jaden played with toy cars on the table, oblivious to his mother's racing heart. At precisely 10 o'clock, the door opened. A Rwandan woman entered, perhaps in her 50s, with dignified posture and eyes that carried both deep sadness and unwavering determination. She wore simple professional clothing and moved with quiet purpose. Behind her came a black man in his 40s, fit and alert, wearing a dark suit that screamed law enforcement even without identification. The woman's eyes found Cynthia immediately, some recognition passing between them. She approached the table. "Cynthia?" Her voice was accented, warm despite the gravity of the situation. "Yes. Amina?" "I am." Amina gestured to her companion. "This is FBI Special Agent Leonard Jackson. I hope you don't mind that I brought him. What you've found requires law enforcement involvement." Cynthia's stomach clenched at the sight of the FBI agent, but Amina's gentle expression steadied her. "I understand." "Is there somewhere private we can talk?" Agent Jackson asked, his voice professional but not unkind. The cafe owner, responding to Agent Jackson's badge, provided access to a small back room used for private parties. They settled around a table, Jaden occupied with crayons and paper the owner had kindly provided. "Thank you for coming," Amina said. "Your email, what you described, if it's real, it's something I've spent 30 years searching for." Cynthia pulled the wrapped mask from the diaper bag, carefully unwrapping it on the table. Amina's breath caught audibly. Her hands moved toward it, then stopped, trembling. "May I?" she whispered. Please. Amina lifted the mask with reverence, tears immediately spilling down her cheeks. The mask of Queen Conjugera, she breathed. I remember it. I was 12 years old in school, when our teacher took us to the National Museum. This mask was the centerpiece of the royal collection. 3 days later, the killing started. Agent Jackson was already photographing the mask from multiple angles, his expression growing more serious. This is authentic, he confirmed. No question. Cynthia brought out the box of gemstones, then the journal. Agent Jackson examined each item methodically, taking notes, capturing evidence. He read through sections of the journal, his jaw tightening as he processed Samuel Brooks's documentation. If the rest of the collection matches what's described here, he said finally, we're talking about one of the largest recoveries of stolen cultural property in decades, possibly ever. Amina was still holding the mask, tears streaming freely now. I need to tell you something, so you understand what this means. She set the mask down carefully and looked at Cynthia. I survived the genocide. I was 12 years old. I watched my parents die. My brothers. My friends. Everything I knew was destroyed in 100 days. Her voice was steady despite the tears, strengthened by 30 years of carrying this story. When the killing finally stopped, when the world finally paid attention, so much was gone. Not just people, but history. Our museums were empty, our churches stripped, our heritage stolen or destroyed by people who wanted to erase us completely. This mask, she touched it gently, represented our continuity, our connection to ancestors and kings. Its theft was another kind of murder. Cynthia felt tears burning her own eyes. My uncle's journal. He wrote about what he saw, what was happening. Your uncle was a hero, Amina said firmly. He risked everything to save what he could save. Most people just watched, or profited. Her expression hardened slightly. The Whitmores profited. Agent Jackson cleared his throat. Which brings us to the practical problems. People like the Whitmores have expensive lawyers and powerful connections. They've evaded justice for 30 years by covering their tracks thoroughly. Your uncle's journal is compelling evidence, but we need more. What kind of more? Cynthia asked. Direct evidence, recorded admissions, financial records we can subpoena once we have probable cause. He leaned forward. The journal tells us what happened. Now we need to prove it in a way that will hold up in court. He outlined the plan carefully. Cynthia would wear a recording device to her meeting with Richard tomorrow evening. She would accept his offer to discuss the storage unit sale, then guide the conversation towards specifics. Get him to mention the artifacts, his previous relationship with her uncle, his knowledge of what was in the unit. The key, Agent Jackson explained, is to let him talk. Men like Whitmore love to boast, especially when they think they're in control. They can't resist explaining how clever they've been. Meanwhile, he would begin a parallel investigation into the Whitmore's art collection, financial records, and business dealings, building a broader case that would make the stolen Rwandan artifacts part of a larger pattern. Amina would prepare an investigative article for publication once they had sufficient evidence. The legal system moves slowly, she said, but public exposure is immediate. Once the world knows what they did, even their powerful friends won't be able to protect them. This is dangerous, Agent Jackson warned, his expression grave. These people have already threatened you and your son. If they suspect you're working with us, they could escalate. We can provide some protection, surveillance on your location, but we're limited until we have enough evidence for arrests. Cynthia looked at the mask lying on the table, at Amina's tear-stained face, at the journal filled with her uncle's careful handwriting. She thought about the $50,000 check, about the easy path of compliance, about keeping Jaden safe by staying invisible. Then she thought about Samuel Brooks, spending 30 years in hiding, always looking over his shoulder, dying alone because he chose principle over comfort. My uncle gave up everything, Cynthia said firmly. His family, his safety, any chance at a normal life. He protected these pieces for 30 years. The least I can do is finish what he started. Tell me what I need to do. Agent Jackson pulled a small device from his pocket, no larger than a button. This is a recording device. It'll attach to your uniform, blend in completely. It has about 4 hours of battery life and transmits to a receiver we'll have nearby. They spent the next 2 hours rehearsing. Agent Jackson taught her conversational techniques, how to ask open-ended questions, how to redirect when Richard tried to control the discussion, how to get him to provide specific details without seeming to interrogate him. Remember, he coached, you're supposed to be tempted by his offer. You're a struggling single mother being offered life-changing money. Let him believe you're seriously considering it. That will make him comfortable, more likely to talk freely. Amina provided context, showing Cynthia photographs and articles about the stolen artifacts. Understanding what they represent will help you stay strong, she said. When you're in that room, when he's offering you money and making threats, remember that these objects are pieces of a nation's soul. They deserve to go home. Before they parted, Amina took both of Cynthia's hands in hers. You're very brave. Your uncle would be so proud of you. But please, be careful. Men like Richard Whitmore don't lose gracefully. They've built their lives on taking what doesn't belong to them. They won't surrender easily. I understand. Here's my personal number. Amina slipped her a card. If anything feels wrong, if you're in danger, call immediately. Promise me. I promise. Agent Jackson added his own warning. We'll have agents nearby during your meeting tomorrow, but inside that house, you'll be alone. If he becomes threatening, if you feel unsafe, end the conversation and leave. The evidence isn't worth your life. Cynthia drove back to the Whitmore estate, the recording device hidden in her purse, her mind spinning with everything she'd learned. She arrived with 20 minutes to spare before Caroline's garden club meeting. Richard was in the foyer when she entered, as if he'd been waiting. His eyes scanned her face, searching. Doctor's appointment go well? He asked casually. Just a routine checkup. Everything's fine. Good. He checked his watch, a gesture that seemed calculated. Have you given any thought to our discussion yesterday? Yes, sir. I'd like to talk more about the details. Tomorrow evening, after I put Jaden to bed? Richard studied her for a long moment, and Cynthia forced herself to meet his gaze steadily. Whatever he was looking for, he seemed to find it. His expression relaxed slightly. Tomorrow evening. My study. 8 o'clock. Come prepared to sign paperwork and accept payment. Yes, sir. That evening, after finishing her duties and putting Jaden to bed, Cynthia lay awake staring at the ceiling. The recording device sat in her pocket, small and innocuous but weighted with enormous consequence. Tomorrow evening, she would enter Richard Whitmore's study and try to get him to confess to 30-year-old crimes. If she succeeded, justice might finally come. If she failed, she'd lose everything. She thought about her uncle's journal entry. Some things matter more than personal safety. Some things are worth any price. Tomorrow she'd find out if she had the courage to pay that price. Outside her window, hidden in the shadows of the estate's grounds, a dark sedan sat with its lights off. Inside, someone watched the servants' quarters with patient, predatory attention. The Whitmores were watching. And tomorrow, everything would change. The day crawled by with excruciating slowness. Every second felt like an hour. Every task an insurmountable burden. Cynthia moved through her duties mechanically, her body performing familiar actions, while her mind raced ahead to the evening's confrontation. The recording device was attached to her uniform, disguised as an ordinary button. It felt enormous, obvious, like everyone could see it. She kept touching it nervously until she forced herself to stop, afraid of drawing attention. She noticed things she hadn't seen before, or perhaps had chosen not to see. Security cameras mounted in every hallway, their lenses following movement. Richard's head of security, a thick-necked man named Foster, seemed to be everywhere she went. Watching. Waiting. Caroline's eyes tracked her with calculating coldness whenever their paths crossed. They knew something was different. Or maybe Cynthia's paranoia was painting threat where none existed. Either way, the tension was suffocating. At 7:30, she put Jaden to bed early, her hands trembling as she pulled his favorite storybook from the shelf. She read him 2 stories instead of 1, then a third, delaying the inevitable. "Mama?" Jaden's small voice cut through her racing thoughts. "Are you scared?" His innocent eyes saw through every mask she tried to wear. She couldn't lie to him. "A little bit, baby. Yes." "Why?" "Because sometimes grown-ups have to do hard things. Brave things. And being brave means doing them even when you're scared. Like the heroes in stories?" Cynthia kissed his forehead, breathing in his familiar scent. "Exactly like that, baby. Exactly like that." "You're my hero, Mama." The words nearly broke her. She held him close, memorizing this moment, just in case. "And you're mine, sweetheart. Always." She stayed until he fell asleep, his small chest rising and falling peacefully. Then she checked the recording device one final time, said a silent prayer to whatever might be listening, and walked down the hallway toward Richard's study. 8 o'clock precisely. She knocked. "Come in?" She opened the door and immediately knew something was wrong. Richard wasn't alone. Edward Sinclair sat in one of the leather chairs, his expression smug. James Pemberton, their attorney, occupied another, a briefcase open on his lap. 3 against 1. The power imbalance was deliberate, designed to intimidate. "Cynthia." Richard's smile was cold. "Please, sit." A single chair faced all 3 men, positioned like an interrogation. She sat, her back straight, hands folded in her lap to hide their shaking. On the desk in front of her lay a stack of legal documents and a check. She could see the amount even from her position. $75,000. "We've reconsidered our offer," Richard said smoothly. $75,000. That's 15% above fair market value, even for legitimate military collectibles. Call it an incentive for quick resolution. He slid the documents toward her. "These transfer ownership of Storage Unit 47 and all its contents to Whitmore Holdings, LLC. Sign here, here, and here. Take the check. And this entire unpleasant situation ends tonight." Cynthia picked up the documents with trembling hands, pretending to read. Her mind raced, remembering Agent Jackson's coaching. Get him to talk. Get him to specify what he wants. Get him to incriminate himself. "Before I sign," she said carefully, "I need to understand something. Why is my uncle's storage unit worth $75,000, Dave? Old military equipment isn't worth this much." Edward leaned forward, his voice patronizing. "Your uncle was a UN peacekeeper stationed in conflict zones. He acquired certain items during his service, items with historical value to collectors like ourselves." "What kind of items?" "That's not really your concern," James interjected. "The documents are clear. You're selling the contents as is, sight unseen. The specific nature of those contents is irrelevant to this transaction." "But it's relevant to me," Cynthia pressed. "I did some research. I found articles about artifacts stolen from Rwanda during the 1994 genocide. Thousands of cultural items taken from museums and churches while people were being killed. My uncle was stationed there." The temperature in the room plummeted. Richard's friendly mask cracked, revealing something harder beneath. "What exactly are you implying, Cynthia?" "I'm not implying anything. I'm asking a question. If those items in the storage unit were stolen during the genocide, and I sell them to you, doesn't that make me an accessory to receiving stolen property?" Edward's expression darkened. "You need to be very careful about accusations you make without evidence." "I have evidence. My uncle kept a journal, detailed records of everything." Richard stood abruptly, slamming his palm on the desk. "Let me be very clear about something. Your uncle intercepted certain items during his deployment. Items that had been legitimately purchased by private collectors before the political situation deteriorated. He stole from us. This transaction isn't us buying stolen goods. It's us recovering our own property." So you did purchase artifacts from Rwanda? I paid for items before the genocide, Richard snapped, then seemed to realize his mistake. He forced his voice calmer. This is ancient history. The artifacts were in a war zone. They would have been destroyed otherwise. We preserved them. By hiding them in a storage unit for 30 years? By keeping them safe until the political situation stabilized. Richard moved around the desk, looming over her. But your uncle refused to return what he'd stolen. He lived like a criminal, hiding, paranoid, dying alone in poverty. Is that the life you want? Cynthia's heart hammered, but she pushed forward. My uncle's journal has names, payment records, documentation of the original theft. Your name appears multiple times, Mr. Whitmore. You paid over $3 million for stolen cultural property. Silence fell like a guillotine blade. Richard's face flushed red. Where is that journal? Somewhere safe. Who have you told about this? His voice was deadly quiet now. Does it matter? It matters very much. He leaned down, his face inches from hers. You have no idea what you're dealing with. Your uncle thought he was clever too. Thought his principles would protect him. They didn't. Accidents happen to people who can't let things go. Are you threatening to kill me? Like you killed my uncle? I didn't kill anyone! Richard's control finally snapped completely. But Samuel Brooks died because he made the wrong choices. Because he valued objects over his own life. Is that what you want? To die for some masks and jewelry that don't belong to you anyway? Edward stood, his bulk menacing. Last chance, Cynthia. Give us the journal. Tell us who you've contacted. Sign the documents and take the money, or things get very ugly very fast. Those artifacts belong to Rwanda, Cynthia said, her voice stronger now. They were stolen during a genocide. My uncle spent 30 years protecting them so they could go home. I'm not selling them to the people who commissioned their theft. James actually laughed, a sharp bark of derision. You think you can fight us? You're a maid with a toddler. We have teams of lawyers, political connections at every level, money to make problems disappear. What do you have? The truth, Cynthia said simply. She stood, her legs shaking but holding. Sometimes that's enough. She turned toward the door. Edward moved fast, blocking her path. You're not leaving until we search your quarters. The journal is here somewhere, and we're going to find it. You can't search my room without a warrant. This is our property, Richard said coldly. You're our employee living in quarters we provide. We don't need a warrant. He pulled out his phone. Foster, bring your team to my study, now. Within minutes, the door opened. 2 security guards entered, large men with blank expressions. Cynthia recognized them from around the estate. Always watching, always present. Search the servants' quarters, Richard ordered. Tear it apart if you have to. Find the journal and any artifacts she's hidden. Horror flooded through Cynthia. Jaden was sleeping in that room. Please, my son is asleep in there. Don't wake him. Don't scare him. Richard smiled. And it was the cruelest expression she'd ever seen. Your son. Yes. Let's discuss him. He moved closer, his voice dropping. Child Protective Services takes very seriously the welfare of children living with parents who commit crimes. Theft, fraud, conspiracy. And when we find that journal in your possession, when we find stolen property you've hidden, those charges become very real. You're going to frame me. We're going to present evidence of your crimes. What happens after that isn't our concern. He paused. Unless you sign these documents right now. Sign them, tell us who you've contacted, and we'll forget this conversation happened. You'll leave with money and your son. Refuse, and you'll leave in handcuffs while your son goes to foster care. Cynthia thought of Jaden sleeping peacefully, unaware that his entire world was about to collapse. She thought of the recording device capturing every word Richard said. She thought of Agent Jackson and Amina, somewhere out there, waiting for evidence. I won't sign, she said. Edward grabbed her arm roughly. Then we do this the hard way. Wait. Richard held up a hand. The child is asleep. I'm not a monster. He checked his watch. It's 8:30 now. The guest room on the second floor is prepared. Cynthia and her son will sleep there tonight, with guards posted outside. At first light tomorrow, we search her quarters. If the journal and artifacts are there, we'll find them. If she's hidden them elsewhere, she'll tell us where. One way or another, this ends tomorrow. Foster, the head of security, nodded. I'll post men outside the guest room. She won't leave. Won't make any calls. My phone, Cynthia said. I need it in case Jaden wakes up scared. Your phone stays here, Richard said. You'll have everything you need in the guest room, guards included. The security team escorted her from the study. As she passed Richard, he leaned close and whispered, You had your chance. Remember that tomorrow, when everything falls apart, you chose this. They stopped at her quarters first. Cynthia picked up the sleeping Jaden as gently as possible, trying not to wake him. He stirred, confused. Mama? Where we going? Just to a different room, baby. Go back to sleep. The guest room was on the second floor, luxurious compared to their cramped quarters, but it felt like a cell. The door had a lock, but Foster took the key. For your safety, he said with a smile that suggested otherwise. Through the door, she heard him positioning guards. Nobody in or out until morning. The boss wants her contained. Cynthia laid Jaden on the enormous bed. He was more awake now, sensing something wrong. Mama, why are those men outside? It's complicated, baby. I'm scared. Me too, she admitted, pulling him close. But we're going to be okay. I promise. She had no phone. No way to contact Agent Jackson or Amina. The recording device had captured everything Richard said, every threat, every admission. But the recording was useless if she couldn't get it to the FBI. And at dawn, they'd search her quarters and find the artifacts hidden in the crawl space. She'd walked into this room believing she was setting a trap. Instead, she'd walked into one. Outside, in the darkness of the estate grounds, a surveillance van sat hidden among the trees. Inside, Agent Jackson and his team had heard everything through the recording device's transmission. They had the evidence they needed. But getting Cynthia and Jaden out safely was about to become very complicated. Cynthia didn't sleep. She lay in the unfamiliar guest room bed with Jaden curled against her side, listening to every sound. The guards' low voices through the door, footsteps in the hallway, Richard's voice passing by at midnight, then again at 2, issuing instructions she couldn't quite hear. Jaden slept fitfully, whimpering occasionally, sensing his mother's fear even in sleep. Every time he stirred, Cynthia held him closer, whispering promises she didn't know if she could keep. Her mind raced through scenarios, each one worse than the last. At dawn, they'd search her quarters. They'd find the artifacts in the crawl space. Then what? Arrest her for theft? Take Jaden away? The recording device had captured Richard's confession, but what good was evidence if she couldn't get it to the FBI? Around 3 in the morning, something vibrated beneath the mattress. Her phone. She'd hidden it there during the brief moment when the guards had turned away, slipping it under the bedding before they'd searched her pockets. They'd been sloppy, overconfident. She carefully extracted it, the screen's glow blindingly bright in the darkness. A text from an unknown number. We know you're in trouble. Stay calm. Help is coming. Delete this message. Agent Jackson. It had to be. Which meant they'd received the recording transmission. They knew what was happening. But what could they do? The Whitmores hadn't technically broken laws yet that warranted immediate intervention. They were holding her in quarters she technically lived in, on property they owned. Without proof of immediate physical danger, the FBI couldn't just raid the estate. She deleted the message and hid the phone again, hope and fear warring in her chest. At 5 o'clock, gray light began seeping through the windows. Cynthia heard movement in the hallway. Multiple footsteps, voices. The door opened without warning. Richard stood there, dressed in expensive casual clothes, a coffee cup in hand. He looked refreshed, energized, while Cynthia felt hollow with exhaustion. "Good morning." His voice was pleasant, conversational, as if they were discussing the weather. "I trust you've had time to reconsider our discussion?" "I have nothing to reconsider." He sighed, the sound almost sympathetic. "That's disappointing. Edward and James are already searching your quarters as we speak. They're quite thorough. They'll find what we're looking for eventually." He sipped his coffee. "You know, your uncle said something very similar when we had our last conversation. Same stubborn determination, same misplaced principles." He moved to the window, looking out at the grounds. He refused to negotiate, refused to see reason. Right up until his car went off that bridge. Terrible accident. Brake lines mysteriously severed. These old vehicles, they're so unreliable. Cynthia's blood turned to ice. "You murdered him." Richard turned, his expression mild. "I didn't do anything personally. But accidents do happen to people who don't know when to quit." He moved toward the door. "Think about that while we decide what to do with you and your son." He left, locking the door behind him. Cynthia rushed to the window, desperate for escape routes. They were on the second floor. Security guards patrolled below. Even if she could climb down, they'd catch her before she cleared the grounds. "Mama?" Jaden's small voice broke through her panic. He was awake, tears on his cheeks. "Mama, I want to go home." "I know, baby. I know." She pulled him into her arms, fighting back her own tears. "Soon. We'll go home soon. I promise." "I'm scared." "Me too, sweetheart. But we're brave, remember? Like heroes in stories." An hour crawled by. Cynthia paced the room, Jaden clinging to her leg, while sounds of searching echoed through the estate. Doors slamming, furniture being moved, angry voices. Then suddenly her door burst open. Edward stood there, his face flushed dark red with fury. He held an empty shopping bag crumpled in his fist. "Where are they?" His voice was raw. "The artifacts aren't in your room. Where did you hide them?" Relief flooded through Cynthia. They hadn't found the crawl space access panel. The artifacts were still hidden. She said nothing, just held Jaden tighter. "Answer me!" Edward stepped closer, his bulk menacing. "Where are they?" "I don't know what you're talking about." "We're tearing this entire estate apart," Edward snarled. "Every room, every closet, every space. And when we find them, we're calling the police. We'll tell them you stole the artifacts from us. Our word against yours. Respected family versus convicted thief. Who do you think they'll believe?" Caroline appeared in the doorway behind him, her perfectly styled hair disheveled, her expression venomous. "Check her car. Check the daycare. Check everywhere she's been this week." She fixed Cynthia with a hate-filled stare. "You've made a terrible enemy today. You and that child will regret this." They stormed out, the door slamming behind them. But Cynthia had heard something important in Caroline's words. Check everywhere she's been. Which meant they were sending people off the estate. The security presence here would be reduced. She moved back to the window, watching. Sure enough, 2 security vehicles pulled away from the grounds, heading toward the city. Time crawled. 30 minutes. 45. Jaden asked for breakfast, for his toys, for normalcy she couldn't provide. Then she heard them. Sirens. Distant at first, then growing louder. Multiple vehicles approaching fast. Cynthia pressed against the window. Up the long driveway came a procession. FBI vehicles with their distinctive markings, local police cars with lights flashing, an entire convoy of law enforcement. "Mama, police!" Jaden pointed, his fear momentarily replaced with a child's fascination. The vehicles stopped in front of the mansion. Doors opened. Agents in FBI jackets poured out. Agent Jackson emerged from the lead vehicle, along with at least a dozen other agents. Commotion erupted below. Richard's voice, loud and outraged. Caroline screaming. Doors banging open throughout the house. Heavy footsteps pounded up the stairs. Cynthia grabbed Jaden and backed against the wall, uncertain if this was rescue or something worse. The door unlocked. An Asian woman in an FBI jacket stood there, her expression professional but kind. "Miss Brooks? I'm Agent Sarah Chen. You're safe now. Please come with me." Cynthia's legs nearly buckled with relief. She lifted Jaden onto her hip and followed Agent Chen downstairs. The foyer was controlled chaos. FBI agents moved through the house with practiced efficiency, photographing, documenting, searching. Richard and Caroline stood near the grand staircase, their hands behind their backs. Handcuffs glinted on their wrists. Edward was being read his rights by two agents near the door. James, the attorney, sat on a bench with his head in his hands. Agent Jackson crossed to Cynthia, his expression relieved. "Are you hurt? Did they harm you?" "No, we're okay. We got everything from the recording last night. The transmission came through perfectly. We've been monitoring your phone's GPS since you entered the estate yesterday. When you didn't respond to our check-in messages this morning, we knew you were in trouble. Judge signed the warrant at 4 a.m. "But how did you get the recording? I was locked in that room." A slight smile crossed his face. "The device transmits wirelessly. Short range, about 300 yards. We had a surveillance van positioned down the street. Every word Richard said came through clearly." Across the foyer, Richard's eyes found Cynthia. Even in handcuffs, even facing federal charges, his gaze burned with hatred. "This isn't over," he called out. "My lawyers will tear you apart. You'll wish you'd taken the money." Agent Jackson moved between them, his voice cold. "Mr. Whitmore, I strongly advise you to remain silent. You've already confessed to conspiracy to commit theft of cultural property, conspiracy to commit fraud, and conspiracy to commit murder. Anything else you say will only make this worse." Caroline's composure finally shattered completely. Tears streamed down her face, smearing her makeup. "We didn't kill anyone," she sobbed. "We just wanted what belonged to us. Samuel stole from us." "Artifacts stolen during genocide don't belong to anyone but the people they were stolen from," Agent Jackson said. "They never did." The front door opened again. Amina rushed in, having been notified by the FBI. She spotted Cynthia and ran to her, pulling her into a tight embrace. "You did it?" Amina whispered. "You were so incredibly brave." "I was terrified every second," Cynthia admitted, her voice breaking now that safety allowed emotion through. That's what bravery is, acting despite the fear. Over the next several hours, the full scope of the operation unfolded. Agent Jackson personally supervised the recovery of artifacts from Cynthia's former quarters, carefully photographing the crawlspace and its contents. With the storage unit key Cynthia provided, another team retrieved the remaining pieces. The FBI's systematic search of the estate uncovered more than anyone had anticipated. File cabinets in Richard's office contained records of dozens of illegal acquisitions, fake provenances, forged documentation, financial records showing payments to smugglers across 3 continents. The Whitmore's entire art collection was built on theft. "This is going to be one of the largest cultural property cases in FBI history," Agent Jackson explained to Cynthia as they watched items being cataloged. "The Rwandan artifacts are the cornerstone, but we're finding evidence of theft from at least 8 other countries." "What happens now?" "The artifacts become evidence during prosecution. We'll hold them securely until trial. Afterward, they'll be returned to Rwanda through proper diplomatic channels. Your uncle's journal will be critical evidence, but it'll be returned to you eventually." "And the Whitmores?" "They're facing federal charges, conspiracy to commit theft of cultural property, receiving stolen property, fraud, money laundering, and we're investigating your uncle's death. If we can prove they ordered it, conspiracy to commit murder gets added." As police prepared to transport the prisoners, Richard made one final desperate attempt. An agent was leading him toward a police vehicle when he pulled back, turning to face Cynthia. "Wait, Cynthia, please." His voice had lost its arrogance, replaced with pleading desperation. "We can still fix this. I'll plead guilty to everything. I'll pay whatever fines they want. Just tell them you made a mistake. Tell them the artifacts were legitimately mine. I'll give you $2 million, cash, today." Cynthia looked at him. This man who'd wielded such power over her life just hours ago. The man who'd threatened her child. Who'd mocked her poverty. Who'd admitted to murdering her uncle. She thought about Samuel Brooks, spending 30 years in hiding for principle. About Amina, searching decades for justice. About what kind of person she wanted Jaden to see when he looked at his mother. "No," she said simply, firmly. "Some things aren't for sale." Richard's face contorted with rage, but agents pulled him away before he could respond. The police vehicles departed, carrying the Whitmores toward booking and a future behind bars. Cynthia stood on the mansion's front steps, Jaden in her arms, Amina beside her. The estate that had been her prison for 18 months spread before her. She was free. But she was also homeless, jobless, uncertain. "What do I do now?" she asked Amina. "Now? You rest. Recover. Let the legal process work. And when you're ready, you help return those artifacts home." News vans were already pulling up the driveway, reporters somehow having gotten wind of the story. Satellite trucks. Cameras. The media descending like locusts. Agent Jackson appeared at her elbow. "We should get you somewhere safe. Away from cameras. The story's going to break hard and fast." "What story?" "The maid who brought down a dynasty. The single mother who exposed decades of theft. The hero who's returning priceless artifacts to Rwanda." He smiled slightly. "You're about to become famous, Miss Brooks." Cynthia looked at Jaden, who was watching the commotion with wide eyes. "I just wanted to do the right thing." "You did. And sometimes that's enough to change the world." As they walked to the FBI vehicle that would take them to safety, Cynthia glanced back once at the mansion, at the place where she'd scrubbed floors and swallowed dignity to survive, at the symbol of wealth built on blood. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in years, she felt something she'd almost forgotten existed. Hope. 3 months later, Cynthia stood in the arrivals terminal of Kigali International Airport, Jaden's hand gripped tightly in hers. The journey from scrubbing floors in a mansion to standing on Rwandan soil as a guest of honor felt impossible, surreal, like a dream she might wake from at any moment. The past 3 months had been a whirlwind. After the Whitmore's arrest, her story exploded across every news platform. Cable news, morning shows, international outlets, all covering the maid who'd brought down a wealthy family's empire of theft. Reporters had camped outside the modest apartment the FBI helped her secure. Her phone rang constantly with interview requests, book deals, movie offers. The attention had been overwhelming, suffocating. But Amina had guided her through it, helping her distinguish between exploitation and genuine support. "Tell your story on your terms," Amina had advised. "And remember who you're really speaking for." The Rwandan government's invitation had arrived 2 weeks after the arrests. A formal letter on official stationery, requesting the honor of her presence at a ceremony receiving the returned artifacts. All expenses paid. They wanted her to see the country her uncle had loved enough to sacrifice everything for. Now, walking through the modern airport terminal with Jaden's small hand in hers, Cynthia felt her uncle's presence like a weight and a blessing. This was his legacy, his mission. She was just completing what he'd started 30 years ago. A delegation waited outside the terminal. The Minister of Culture, dignified in traditional dress, several museum officials, security personnel, and at the center, arm raised in greeting, Amina. "Welcome to Rwanda," the minister said warmly, taking Cynthia's hand in both of his. "Your uncle was a hero to our nation. And now, so are you." The drive through Kigali stunned her. She'd expected what? Ruins? Poverty? Instead, gleaming buildings rose against impossibly green hills. People filled clean streets, purposeful and energized. Cafes, shops, art galleries. This wasn't the war-torn country of 1994. This was a nation that had rebuilt itself, had chosen life and progress while honoring its painful past. That evening, a private dinner brought together government officials and genocide survivors. Cynthia listened to their stories, each one a testament to resilience that made her own struggles feel small. These people had lost everything. Families, homes, identities, yet they spoke with grace about reconciliation and healing. An elderly woman named Beatrice sought her out, taking Cynthia's hands in her weathered ones. The mask of Queen Kanjogera, she said, her voice trembling. It was my grandmother's favorite artifact in the museum. Every month before the genocide, she would take me to see it. She'd tell me stories about our queens, our history. She didn't survive what came after. Tears filled Beatrice's eyes. But knowing that mask is coming home, that my grandchildren will see it, it feels like part of her is coming home too. Thank you. Thank you for bringing our grandmother back. Cynthia broke down, and Beatrice pulled her close. Your tears honor our pain. Your courage honors our survival. The official ceremony took place the next day at the National Museum. Hundreds attended: government officials, diplomats, international journalists, genocide survivors, students. The returned artifacts were displayed in a special exhibition, each piece accompanied by documentation of its theft and recovery. The Minister of Culture spoke first, his voice carrying through the crowded hall. The genocide sought to destroy not just our people but our identity. These artifacts represent our continuity, our connection to ancestors and history. Their theft was another kind of murder. Their return is another kind of resurrection. Then it was Cynthia's turn. She stood at the podium, looking out at hundreds of faces, and felt terror seize her throat. But then she saw Amina in the front row, nodding encouragement, saw Jaden sitting proudly, his eyes wide, saw Beatrice dabbing tears from her cheeks. I didn't know my Uncle Samuel Brooks, Cynthia began, her voice shaking but growing stronger. He died before I could meet him, before I could thank him, before I could tell him I understood. But through his journal, I came to know him. I came to understand that real heroism isn't about glory. It's about doing what's right, even when it costs you everything. She told Samuel's story, how he'd intercepted the stolen shipment, how he'd lived 30 years in hiding, always looking over his shoulder, always protecting artifacts that weren't his to protect. How he'd died alone, his mission incomplete. He could have sold them, Cynthia continued. Could have become rich. Could have lived comfortably. But he knew these pieces belonged to Rwanda. He knew some things matter more than personal safety or wealth. He taught me that lesson across 3 decades, and from beyond the grave. She spoke about the Whitmores, about systems that allow wealthy collectors to profit from tragedy, about the trial bringing international attention to cultural heritage crimes. My uncle left me more than artifacts. He left me a responsibility, to use my voice for those who can't speak, to remember that every artifact represents real people and real history, and that returning what was stolen is just the beginning. We must ensure it never happens again. The applause was deafening. People stood, some crying openly. Jaden clapped enthusiastically, not understanding everything but sensing the magnitude. Afterward, Cynthia spent hours with attendees, survivors who remembered the artifacts from childhood, students learning this history for the first time, museum curators weeping as they examined each returned piece. The minister pulled her aside during a quiet moment. The Rwandan government wants to honor your uncle's sacrifice. We've established the Samuel Brooks Cultural Heritage Foundation. It will fund artifact recovery efforts worldwide and educate people about cultural preservation. We'd like you to serve on the board. Me? I'm not an expert. You're exactly what we need. Someone who understands the human cost. Someone who chose principle over profit. Someone who can explain to ordinary people why this matters. Over the following days, Cynthia and Jaden toured the country. Genocide memorials that brought her to tears, artisan workshops preserving traditional crafts, schools where children learned about their heritage with pride. Everywhere, people thanked her, touched her, blessed her. On their final day, Amina drove them to a small village in the countryside where Samuel had served during his deployment. The village had a memorial garden listing names of protectors who'd tried to help during the killing. The elders asked permission to add Samuel's name. An old man approached, moving slowly on a cane. I remember your uncle, he said in careful English. He gave my family shelter in his convoy. We would have died. He saved many of us. And when the thieves came for our treasures, he saved those too. He was a good man. A very good man. Cynthia collapsed into sobs, finally grieving properly for the uncle she'd never known, finally grasping the full weight of what he'd sacrificed. Back in America, life had transformed. The Whitmore trial was set for autumn. Their lawyers were employing every delay tactic, but the evidence was overwhelming. Richard, Caroline, Edward, and James each faced decades in federal prison. The fabricated evidence against Cynthia had been exposed. The FBI discovered the Whitmores had hired a tech expert to create fake surveillance footage. That expert had cooperated immediately when offered leniency. Cynthia had moved into a 2-bedroom apartment, paid for by an advance on the book she was writing about Samuel's story. Jaden had his own room for the first time. Walls painted his favorite color, filled with toys from well-wishers worldwide. She'd enrolled part-time in online nursing classes, working toward the degree she'd once thought impossible. But more importantly, she'd found purpose beyond survival. She spoke at universities about cultural heritage crimes, consulted with the FBI on artifact theft cases, worked with the Samuel Brooks Foundation helping other nations recover stolen treasures. Agent Jackson told her the case had inspired new legislation. Congress was considering stricter provenance laws and harsher penalties for trafficking stolen cultural property. Her Senate testimony had been described as powerful and transformative. 6 months after the arrests, a package arrived from the FBI. Inside was Samuel's journal, finally released from evidence. She read it again, understanding now what she couldn't before. The loneliness, the fear, the desperate hope that someone would finish his mission. On the final page, she noticed something she'd missed before. Faint pencil writing, nearly invisible. If you're reading this, I'm gone. I hope you're Marie, or her child. I hope you're brave enough to finish what I started. These artifacts aren't treasure. They're testimony. Proof that even in darkness, some things remain sacred. Return them. Tell the story. Make the world remember. And know that though we never met, I loved you. You're my family, my hope, my redemption. Be brave. Cynthia pressed the journal to her chest, tears flowing freely. I was brave, Uncle Samuel. I finished it. We finished it together. One Saturday morning, she drove with Jaden back to Riverside Self-Storage for the last time. Unit 47 stood empty now, its contents scattered between FBI evidence lockers and museum displays in Kigali. The facility manager, Dale, met them there. Got something to show you. Beside Unit 47's door hung a small brass plaque, installed at the Rwandan government's request. Storage Unit 47, where Captain Samuel Brooks protected Rwanda's stolen heritage for 30 years, and where his niece Cynthia Brooks found courage to return it. Some legacies are worth any price. May we all have such courage when tested. Cynthia took a photograph of Jaden standing before the plaque, his small hand touching the brass. One day, when he was older, she'd tell him everything. About his great-uncle who chose principle over comfort. About how ordinary people facing extraordinary circumstances can change the world. As they drove away, Cynthia thought about the journey, from invisible maid to international hero, from poverty to purpose, from powerless to empowered. The Whitmore mansion was being sold to pay restitution. The stolen artifacts were home. Justice, imperfect but real, had prevailed. She didn't have millions of dollars. Some months bills were still tight. But she had something worth infinitely more, the knowledge that she'd done right, honored her uncle's sacrifice, made a tangible difference. She glanced at Jaden in the rearview mirror, playing with a toy car, humming happily. He was growing up in a world where his mother had stood against power and won, where justice had triumphed over wealth, where courage had defeated cruelty. That was the real inheritance, not money, not fame, but the lesson that some things, truth, justice, heritage, were worth any price. And sometimes, that's the greatest fortune of all.
Thank you for staying with me until the very end of this incredible journey. If this story touched your heart, Wait until you see what's coming next. It's even more powerful and inspiring than you can imagine. So don't go anywhere. Click on that video showing on your screen right now to dive into another amazing story that will absolutely blow your mind. Trust me, you won't regret it.